Hi, it's Lauren, and welcome to my craft room. I'm super excited to start this month's Interactive Element of the Month series, and I am featuring shaker cards. I hope you enjoyed last month's Magic Picture Changer dies, and I am super excited to not say Magic Picture Changer dies 17 times a video. So for the first shaker card that I'm going to be making, I'm going to be using die cuts. So you can either use this technique using a steel die or any type of die that you have with your machine that uses pressure to cut, or you could also use a electronic cutter. So I have a Brother Scan and Cut. So for my first card, I genuinely thought I had this apple die from Fawn, but I didn't, so clearly that's now on my wish list. But I cut out a bunch of different apple shapes on my Scan and Cut and put together this card. So when you see all of my different apple shapes, I will explain more that I cut it from my electronic cutter, but you can use any type of frame-like die to create this type of shaker. So I'm super excited to share with you how I made this card, so let's get right into it. I've already cut out my Lift the Flap tree backdrop in some craft paper, and I am going to distress the edges of my tree to give it a little bit of dimension. I originally brought out brushed corduroy, but I didn't like it. It was too kind of yellow for the craft paper. So then I got out ground espresso, and I thought that added more of the look I was going for. So I'm using some scrap paper to just fit in between the openings and make sure I'm only applying color to the areas that I want to apply color. And I'm going to go ahead and distress all along the edge of the tree as well as my little Lift the Flap opening. I'm not really caring too much about how it looks on the top and bottom of the trees because I am going to be covering them with a grassy border as well as the cloudy border or the puffy cloud border to create a tree canopy. I went ahead and did this for all three trees, and now I'm going to splatter on some silk using this dark roast color from Fun Stamper's Journey. I'm going to go ahead and set that aside to dry, and now I am going to cut out of some green cardstock using the large stitch rectangle die, and on one side cut out the grassy border, and on the other I'm going to layer my medium-sized puffy cloud border. I'm using my Lift the Flap tree die so I can judge exactly where my tree border needs to go, because I don't want it to cover my Lift the Flaps. So I'm using some purple tape and I'm trying to layer that on perfectly. I'll run that through my die cut machine, and now I have my tree canopy. I decided to use Rustic Wilderness. This is a new color from Tim Holtz for the Distress Oxide line, and I hadn't used it before, so I'm using it to add a little bit of depth to my grass and my trees. I just thought that that would make them look more round and just have a little bit more texture and interest to them. And I'm using the color Sage Green Silk to add some splatter. Using that same large stitched rectangle die, I cut out a piece of light blue paper, and I am using broken china to add some sky and using my cloudy stencil to create clouds. So my clouds aren't going to be white, they're going to be more of a lighter blue because I'm adding darker blue ink to this lighter blue paper. I'm going to rotate my stencil and add color. I'm not going to go as heavy this time, so I'm going to start with putting ink onto my stencil and blending it out onto the paper to create a softer line. I'm going to rotate my stencil again and keep going until I have 4 rows of clouds. Now I'm going to add color to the bottom, and that will be the bottom of my sky for the background. Now most of this is going to be covered by the trees, so no need to be super perfect. We're just creating texture in our background. I'm going to use some whipped cream silk, but it's not as white as I was hoping it would be. I think I need to shake it up a little bit more. The paint might have settled on the bottom. And then also using beach ball for some blue splatter. I have a white cardstock base, and now that everything is dry, we're going to start assembling the background. Now I want my Lift the Flaps to have a dark brown inside so it looks like it's inside the tree. So I'm tracing along the edge of the tree as well as inside that oval shape where the lift the flap is for all 3 trees. I'm going to cut inside the line so it's smaller than the width of the tree, and then larger than the oval so it's larger than what is showing through the flap. Add some glue around the oval on the back side, and then put that dark cardstock. So you can't see it behind the tree, but it will cover perfectly behind the oval. And I'm going to repeat this process for all 3. Now that that's done, we can put our blue cardstock sky background to our white card base. There is going to be some thickness to this card, so I'm going to go ahead and glue all of my background directly to the card base, as well as my trees. They will also be glued directly down with some wet glue. I'm adding glue all along behind the trees, and then I will put this on top of our cloudy background. Now that that's done, I want to pop up the grass and the trees to create some dimension. I have this foam tape roll that I just got from scrapbook.com, and I'm really enjoying the width and thickness of this roll of foam tape. I put the grass on the bottom, and now I'm going to add it behind my tree canopy. Putting one long strip on the top, and then I'm going to cut some little bits up just to give those little tree puffs here some extra sturdiness. I'm going to pull off that release paper and adhere that to the top of my card. Now my background is done. I'm going to work on the shaker. So I have cut out different pieces of red cardstock to create kind of the outside of my apple half. I've cut it 9 times. I have 8 solid of the red, and one of the solid red has a kind of dash perforated line just to match somewhat close to the Lawn Fawn look of the rest of the card with their little dashed line, stitched line on there. So I am gluing all 8 of the solids together just using wet glue. And then before I glue on my 9th one with my little fancy line, I am going to apply a piece of acetate. So I realized as I was putting glue down on my little stack that I hadn't cut my acetate out. So I'm really sorry that I did this a little bit off screen here. But what I did was I cut a piece of acetate, and I am cutting it just slightly smaller than my white background piece, which is going to be my apple core. So that way I didn't have to line up exactly to the edge. It's smaller than the outside edge of my apple. So that way it would cover everything just fine, but I wouldn't have to worry about lining it up just right. And once that acetate is done, I can apply that pretty outside red apple frame. Now before I add in my little shaker bits, I'm using my embossing tool here to make sure there's no static on my acetate and my background piece, as well as making sure any sticky spots are covered with the powder and aren't sticky anymore. And I'm using the Sparkle Blends Apple for Teacher. I talked about it in an earlier video that I will link here, and it has some of the cutest little elements. There are red, yellow, and blue little shaker bits, but my favorite are the little clay apples. I made sure to include as many as I could from the embellishment mix. There's just so many cute things in there that it was hard to make sure everything I liked would fit. So I also cut out a couple leaves and a stem on my brother's Scan and Cut, and I am layering those on the back side of my apple shaker here. And now I am going to place it on my card. So I'm going to actually be covering the middle flap, so it wasn't necessary to apply the brown behind that flap, but that's okay. I wasn't 100% sure on my layout at the time. I am adding a little bit of foam tape to the apple pieces and gluing it down to the grass. That way the apple would be flush. And now I'm going to work on my stamped images. I have some white cardstock here, and I'm going to be stamping from the So Owlsome set from Lawn Fawn. I'm stamping 2 owls and a bunch of apples. I'm using my black licorice ink because it is alcohol marker friendly, and I'm going to be using my Spectrum Noir Illustrator markers. So I'm stamping twice to make sure I have a nice clean black line. And then I'm going to peel off my apple here and just use a clear block and stamp it a bunch more times. I think I had what is like 9 total. It was a lot. So now that is done, I am going to zoom in here so you can see my coloring. I'm doing very simple coloring because these images are so small. I'm using 2 different colors, one light and one dark. So for the apples, I am coloring them with CR7 and CR9. And for the leaves, I am using LG3 and AG3 just to create some simple shadowing on my apples. Now my owls, I'm using EB2 and 4 for the kind of darker feathers of the owl. I was going to say fur, but owls don't have fur. And then for the inside of the owl, I am using GB2. I finally got a lighter brown marker for my owls. I'm going to add some rose pink cheeks and then use some yellows to color in their feet and their beaks. Once all their coloring is done, I'm bringing out my white gel pen to add some highlights to all of my colored images. I'm going to be placing the apples in different areas on the card and in different directions, so I added highlights in different spots on the apples and then added highlights to where I thought light would hit my owl images. I'm going to use their corresponding dies to cut them out, which was a lot of fun cutting out all of those tiny little apples. I'm using some low tack tape to help keep those dies in place and run it through my die cut machine. So now it's time to assemble these images onto my card. I'm using my jewel picker just to help pick up those apples a little easier off of my table and to place them on the card. I'm just picking random spots for the apples to go on the top of my green canopy of leaves here, as well as under. I want them to look like nice full apple trees. And then I'm also going to place a couple next to the large apple sitting on the grass like they've fallen down from the tree. I am placing the owls inside the lift the flap so they each face towards the center of the card. And now I am going to glue down all of those apples, and I am going to adhere the owls, the side that's facing the center, with a thin dimensional, and then glue so my lift the flap kind of sits perfectly on top of the image. And I'm going to do the same thing for the other owl, putting dimensions towards the center of the card and gluing the other side down to the paper. So here is my final card. It's so cute. Look at those little owls and the fun shaker apple on the front using this awesome embellishment pack. I hope you enjoyed this video and that using die cuts to create a shaker card might be something you want to try. If you like this video, please hit like, and if you're new to my channel, please hit subscribe. Thank you so much for watching and have a great day.